project. But before we get into the actual project, I just want to take a few minutes, talk about some of the objectives, and then go into some of the introductory information before we hit into the project. So the project really is designed for you to have an understanding of how hydrogen fuel can be produced and used in terms of vehicle fuels, being able to describe the advantages of hydrogen fuel as they relate to hydrocarbons, and then describing the hurdles that we need to overcome to make hydrogen fuel more feasible. So as we go into this, I want to talk about a couple of high points with the lesson. Really, one of the big things that you should consider as you go through this is that um, as we've talked about our non-renewable sources in the United States alone, we burn up to approximately 14 million barrels of oil every day just by running all of our transportation vehicles. So, our buses, both public and private, our motorcycles, our cars, okay, and even our recreational vehicles like boats all contribute to that usage of 14 million barrels of oil every day. Okay, and second, really, all of that burned oil is really our fastest growing source of air pollution, as as the byproducts of hydrocarbon combustion release carbon dioxide into the air. So two things to consider when you're really looking at this from the hydrogen perspective. Wouldn't it be nice to say that a car can run without gasoline and produces no air pollution? Or we as a population have reduced our hydrocarbon pollution by 20% in the next 10 years. Wouldn't that be something that you should think about? That could be something that's very proactive in order to be good stewards to the planet. So let's take a few minutes. Let's talk about some of the rationale behind hydrogen fuel. When we talk about the world running on a hydrocarbon fuel economy, the coal, oil, and natural gas, there are dominant sources of fuel for motor vehicles, and we really heavily depend on them for transportation and trade. But remember, with those fossil fuels comes pollution, and comes the essentially the fear that those resources could become scarce at a point in time. And it should be something that we should be mindful of. Okay? So with hydrogen fuel as being an alternative to power our vehicles, it would essentially almost work to eliminate that hydrocarbon pollution that we have created as a result of increasing our global economy. So the only byproduct after the combustion of hydrogen fuel is water vapor, which is essentially a non-polluting source. And when you really boil it down, and you compare, the energy released from hydrocarbons as compared to hydrogen, hydrogen releases actually more energy per gram than any other fuel obtained on the planet, and it's readily available from water. And when you think about the planet as a whole, 75 to 78% of our planet is water. It's completely renewable. It's got a lot of benefits. However, there are also cons that you talk about the argument from the transition from hydrocarbon to hydrogen. So that's something that needs to be discussed. So the benefits of producing hydrogen fuel really are they're explained in your lesson. How do we make it? Okay, it's important to note that it doesn't exist by itself in nature large enough quantities to obtain. So we actually have to extract the hydrogen from hydrogen bearing compounds. Okay, and to extract that hydrogen from something else, we essentially have to use electricity. So here's the catch 22 in all of this, in that we have to use energy to get energy. Okay, and many argue that that doesn't make sense because it costs money to do that, and in addition to do that, we already have to use um, you know in some instances hydrocarbon producing sources of energy to get that clean energy. So um, the bottom line is that hydrogen, it's not an energy resource, but it's a fuel produced by using energy, and thus the yield will always essentially be lower. Okay, so something to consider, and of course, the other thing to consider would be, you know, the way to best get away from our dependence on oil for transportation would obviously be to turn our attention towards electric vehicles as we develop this technology. The use of hybrid and electric cars, okay, which combustion which combine our conventional combustion engines with rechargeable batteries, and obviously make cars more fuel efficient, um, you know and essentially drive less. So, some things to think about as you go through this lesson. So let's actually get in and let's talk about the project for a minute. So, um, the project essentially is a three prompt um, essay. Okay, it really asks you for really three short paragraphs as it relates to the information that you've synthesized in the lesson. Okay, so in the first question, it says in about three sentences, so a short paragraph. Talk about why transitioning to a hydrogen economy has its advantages. So here you're essentially talking about the advantages of hydrogen fuel. Okay, we just talked about those earlier on in this, and it goes back into your lesson. Talk about the elimination of pollution, its renewable ability, and that the energy that it releases as compared to hydrocarbons. Okay. In the second prompt, it asks you to explain the three disadvantages associated with hydrogen fuel use. So, again, another short paragraph, but talk about how the use of hydrogen would mean the extraction of hydrogen from hydrogen bearing compounds. Okay. Um, Focus on the the new infrastructure that's going to have to be developed for doing this, and what are the benefits of that, and what are the drawbacks of that. So that's what you're going to talk about in that, and again, that's something that you can find right back in your lesson. And then the final prompt is why is a high use of renewable energy necessary to make hydrogen fuel an environmentally sound alternative. So again, another paragraph about, you know stick to the points about the extraction, okay, of hydrogen from hydrogen bearing compounds. Um, Talk about the use of electricity again, and then talk about the redundancy that exists because of pollution. Okay, so you're going to also make those points in that essay. I would suggest that you put that in a Word document. Make sure all your grammar and your spelling are accurate and complete. If you use any outside sources besides Odysseyware, please make sure you cite those sources. And if you're struggling with anything in this project or in the lesson, please seek me out into the virtual office, and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. So with that, we'll be back next week going over another project. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.